Hello and welcome to Endurance Minded. It's the podcast that aims to redefine what it means to reach our full potential by exploring how movement and mindset impacts our lives and how we can all work to show up as the best versions of ourselves. I'm your host, Taylor Thomas, founder and coach at TEC. And on this episode, we're going to bring you a little bit different content. This episode is going to be about me. It's going to be about my story. And I was prompted to do this episode by a wonderful member of our Impact Initiative team. Her name is Bekah, and she challenged me to tell my story. She challenged me to explore how I got to where I'm at, to reflect on what I've learned, what twists and turns have brought me to where I'm at. And I think it's an important story in the sense that I think a lot of times folks wonder, how did this endurance guy go from an athlete and coaching athletes and racing bikes to being a business coach and working in leadership development and helping other coaches grow and scale their businesses and doing some of the things and engaging in some of the things that I'm engaged in. And it's a fair question, and it's one that I hope that will provide a lot of value and a lot of perspective for our listeners, because my hope is that I can always help to provide a bit more perspective and to provide a bit more nuance and to help flatten the learning curve for other people so that they can spend more time doing what they love. They can get to a place where they're engaged in things in a meaningful way in their own lives, and that they're making progress and making strides in the direction of the things that matter most to them. And so my hope in telling at least part of my story is that it will help, that there'll be some takeaways that you can learn from the struggles that I've had and the instances in my life that I've had where I wasn't sure what to do, and I wasn't sure what my next step was, and I wasn't confident in what I was supposed to be doing or how I was supposed to get there. And so this is a big step for me in the sense that I'm not great at being vulnerable. I struggle to imagine that anyone wants to hear my story, and that my story is one that is valuable or has value. And I think maybe that's the other angle, or my hope in presenting this to you, is that it might help overcome imposter syndrome, or it might help us overcome that little thing in the back of our minds that tells us, no one's interested in what I have to say, or I don't deserve to be here, or I don't know what I'm talking about, or my story's not interesting, or whatever that narrative is for you. Maybe in me doing this and overcoming those same thoughts that I had about the fact that this is not what people want to hear, that it's not valuable, that I should be focusing on other things, whatever that is, that maybe you'll get out of your own way. You'll get out of your own head. You'll share your story. You'll engage again in things that you care about. You'll take that next step. You'll look for support. You'll look for resources. Look for a place to turn that allows you to do things you care about, that allows you to get out of your own way, to change that narrative in your mind, so that you can engage, so that you can do hard things. And that's one of the themes that you'll hear in this story as Bekah guides us through different questions and asks me different questions to kind of pull apart my story, is that it's the culmination of doing really hard things for a really long time. and that I really see value in that. I wouldn't change it. That I think hard hard is good, and it matters that the things that we care most about are challenging and they're not served to us on a platter, and that they're not easy and up for grabs and here for the taking, that we have to work for it. And I think of all the challenges I've had and the highs and lows and learning experiences and all of the twists and turns, the one thing that remains the same is that I love the fact that it's hard. I love that it's not easy. I love that I get the opportunity to learn and grow and continue to engage in things that are uncomfortable, because I know for a fact that on the other side of that discomfort, on the other side of the hard, is something that is truly good, and life-changing and valuable. And so it's worth the effort. And, we make the distinction of, is it hard for the sake of being miserable, or is it hard for the sake of being fulfilling? And I think I just want you to kind of hold that as you move through this episode. Is it hard for the sake of just pure misery, or is it hard because it's fulfilling? And that's really a cornerstone for me, and a thread that Bekah helps pull apart and expose as we go through just kind of the high level version of my story, is that hard in the direction of being fulfilled. Hard because it matters and it's meaningful and it's something I care about. And then being able to be really honest when it's not that, when it's just miserable. And you'll hear a part of my story that reflects that. And that required some real change and some real soul searching. And so we go from, kind of start to finish. What led me to endurance sports, to what led me to business, what my first business looked like, the challenges there, how that produced perspective, up to founding TEC, to the evolution there, to what I do with Impact Initiative and the business and leadership space, and working with founders, entrepreneurs, teams, executives around the world to help them maximize their impact on the world and develop their leadership skills. And so what we learn is that it's all related. It all led me to where I'm at right now. It all builds on itself. Nothing happens in isolation. And it's important that we pay attention and that we're willing to learn, and we remain curious, and we remain vulnerable, and we remain open to the opportunity that we have things to learn. And that when we engage in things we care about and we're willing to stay consistent, do hard things because we know that they're important, that it will yield good results all of the time. So I want to thank you for listening. This is a long one. We settled in. We let this one just kind of run its course. This is a longer form episode than we typically release. So I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for taking the time to share in my story with me, giving me a space to do that. I hope it's valuable to you. And I'd love to hear what you think about it at enduranceminded.com. Leave us a quote or a question at the bottom, and please enjoy my story. Let's get into it. How are you gonna force me to be vulnerable today?
Gonna pry you apart. Just kidding. No, to start, this should be real easy and fun. I just want you to give me a little of your history with endurance sports. Like, when did you first get into it? Did you get a bike at age 3 and then nobody could catch you from then on, or like, when did you
Yeah,
first start getting into more of an like endurance sports space, even beyond just, I don't know, regular fitness or jogging, bike riding?
right. Yeah, I kind of always wished I was one of those kids, or that story of, I got a bike when I was 3 and that was the end, and they can never catch me. I spent a lot of time outdoors as a kid. I grew up on a farm, in a rural part of South Carolina. But no, that wasn't like, I was just a normal kid. So the first kind of exposure to that was, I wasn't really great at ball sports, like quote unquote classic, basketball, baseball. which were like the go-tos when I was growing up. Um, so I picked up soccer and cross country, and I really liked soccer. And our soccer coach was great, and he really placed an emphasis on fitness. And so he encouraged all of us to run cross country because that was the opposite season. And so you can
Mhm.
build like aerobic fitness in preparation for soccer. Um, and that was the first time I like competed. That was in high school. First time I competed in like some sort of endurance sport, trained, for running. And and then I went to college and really stuck with it. I had like a small blip, as I think most college kids do, like my first semester of freshman year, where I was not healthy, and just like doing all the things that college kids do. And then I was like, I really like training. Like I like to run, I like to exercise. Um, so I got back in the gym, started running again, and that was when I really like was interested in got interested in like really pushing myself. So I started to in college. I ran my first marathon. Um, then I was really interested to see if I could do that fast, and so I started training really hard for marathons. And yeah, so I think that was really it. Like college was probably realistically like the first time I'd had, because it was also up to me, right? Like no one. I went to college on an academic scholarship. I didn't go for sports. Um, and so I didn't have to train. I could have, I could have done anything. I could have not been uh, been active. So yeah, I think that was the first time it felt like it kind of clicked for me in terms of like really being interested in engaging in like endurance sports and training, finding that kind of internal drive for myself. It wasn't a coach, it wasn't a team sport. It wasn't something I had to do, and that really kicked things off. And I was 18 or 19 probably.
So you must have had like a good amount of focus on academics since you were on an academic scholarship. What was, did you find that endurance sports like trying to increase your marathon time or even running a marathon um, helped you focus more on your school stuff? Was it like, did it feel related to you, or is it just, here's this other thing I enjoy doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd like to say that I put that final point on it as a kid. I mean, now certainly I recognize the value of like that kind of focus and kind of dedication and how that shows up in other areas of our lives. But I mean, I have also always really liked routine. And I like giving myself a schedule. I like having deadlines. And so to that end, it helped me kind of be regimented in a way that felt very productive for me and just the way that I like to work. And so, yeah, I mean, I wrote myself a schedule, and this, of course, was like I had like a day timer. And I was like, okay, like it's 6 a.m. track workout, and then school, and then in between these classes, you're gonna study, and you're gonna do that at the library, and then at 5 o'clock, you are done. You're gonna go to the gym. You're gonna do a strength workout, and then you're gonna study from here to here, and then you're gonna have dinner, and you got. So I just like always it helped me just kind of like bookend my day and think about how I would get all of the things done that I needed to get done, especially as I continued to move like through my college career, and things just got harder, right? Like as the workload intensified, as I was, writing my thesis and different things. Yeah, it was always a piece of that I think really helped me just kind of like um, stay in the game and like stay focused. And I kind of built my schedule around that, and it was something that I prioritized, and so it meant that I really had to prioritize like how I got everything else in, um, because the training piece did take up a fair amount of time. So yeah,
Yeah.
um, early days of like probably how I feel about things now.
Like we could not have been more different in our approach to academics.
Yeah, I
That's
mean,
amazing.
my roommates at the
You have a
time,
great
like,
schedule.
no, I mean, my roommates then, and some of them, I'm still close with. I mean, they've long said that like I'm like a 70-year-old man. Like I've always been trapped in like a young person's body. Like like they're out like doing their thing, and yeah, I was like, guys, from 10 to 11:30, I've blocked out time for friendship. If you'd like to engage in that friendship now, I was like, we could have a rousing game of ping pong, and then I'm going to go back to my schedule. They're like, what is wrong with you?
That's amazing. So from the like academics were clearly a focus too. What were you planning on throughout college being like your career? Did you have a strong job, work, career focus in mind, or was it more like I'm just going to do these academics? How did
Yeah.
that progress?
Yep. Yeah, that's probably like the twistiest, turniest part of the story. Maybe I mean, at least early on. Um, so I went to school to be a doctor. I was like, this is definitely it. Like I was pre med. I excelled in science in high school. Um, Kind of so much so that I like maxed out of my high school classes when I was a sophomore. So I started taking um, college classes my junior
Mm.
year, um, and I was like, oh yeah, this is it. And I liked it. Like I was good at it, and it was fun, and and I that seemed like that's like one of the paths people talk about, right? Like it was very. I grew up in like again the rural South, and a traditional family, and they're like, this is a good job. Like if you can be a doctor, like that's the pinnacle. I was like, okay, great. Like I'll do that. Um, and I was the first person. Um, my dad went back to school, but I was the first person to like go through kind of a traditional path. Ultimately, both of my parents are very well educated, but they did that retroactively. So, there's like that just seemed like a really straightforward path. It was like great, like first person to kind of go through this traditional college path, and I'll be a doctor, and that'll be great. Um, and then like I got to college, and honestly, like it was just really hard. Like I really struggled with. I had really breezed through high school and breezed through like early college classes, and I really struggled with the math. I'm not good at math, and this is a dumb thing to say, but like I didn't realize how much math was involved in pre med.
I'm sitting here like, why is math important for becoming a doctor? That
I know it was
no.
a very very heavy math curriculum, and I do not have a math brain. I'm
Hmm.
still currently not good at math. Um, it's not the way my brain works, and so fast forward like I was like, I got to pivot. Like this doesn't feel fulfilling anymore. I remember like had a bit of a breakdown. I was on the side of like on campus, like walking down the sidewalk, called my dad, and I was like, man, I don't think this is it. Like I'm really really struggling. Like my grades are not. And I was going to like all the tutoring, doing all again. I was like, it wasn't for lack of trying. I was just like, I don't
Hmm.
know, like this might not be in the cards. Um, and he was like, well, just you know, do it. Like you got to enjoy it. Like do what feels right. So in that time, I had taken a couple of like more advanced history classes, and I really liked those. And I'd always enjoyed reading and like learning about history. So I pivoted and I double majored in history and religion. Um, and I was like, oh, great, I'm going to be a professor. I was like, that'll be great because I still wanted to like pursue higher education, like post collegiate like graduate work.
Hmm.
Um, and so then did that, loved it, like legitimately had the best time like I like being a student, so I loved studying and I loved writing papers, and I was such a nerd and I loved all that stuff. Um, and was on track to uh, like visited some schools. I was going to actually move to New Zealand for a doctorate program, and um, I just really wanted to start working. I don't know, I don't know exactly like what the pivotal kind of inflection point was, but was I just didn't see a ton of value in like continuing to be a student. I had like gotten into these programs, was looking down kind of the runway of what that was going to look like. You know, I was 21 years old or whatever, and I was like, man, like I'm going to be 30 by the time this is really like off up and running. You know, like we're gonna, you know, and and not to diminish like what it's required to do that, but I don't know. I just felt like that wasn't really what I was supposed to do, and so um, I didn't take those offers. I didn't go to school after college. Um, yeah, and I started my first company shortly thereafter. And yeah, the rest is history, I suppose.
Well, I want to pick a little bit at that transition from pre-med into changing majors, because clearly at that time, from what you said about how you scheduled out your day, about not only running marathons, but like, oh, this is fun, let me get better times. You weren't afraid of hard things. So, what helped you, I don't know, parse apart like doing really hard things, going for training, pushing yourself? I mean, I have to imagine, even if that naturally is something you enjoy, that there didn't feel easy all the time, pushing yourself physically. What helped you see it differently? The what you were facing as a pre-med student of like, this is difficult and difficult to the point where know I need to make a change rather than like double down and push harder.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know. I mean, I think it certainly started with some version of like an identity crisis. You know, I had put a lot of my self worth in how good of a student I was and like how easy. And I mean, I worked really hard, but yeah, I mean, it came up until that point had come what felt like relatively easily. It felt like, you know, felt like kind of my, um, something I was good at. And so I think really it was, again, I was like back, I remember that conversation with my dad, and it was that I genuinely wasn't enjoying the process of engaging in those hard things. Like it
Mm-hmm.
felt demeaning and it didn't feel like there was a reward. And it also seemed like it was an impossible hill to climb because I was like, this is just the beginning. Like, I'm only 2 years in. Like, we got, you know, I got to get out of college. I got to go into a pre med program. I mean, we're just scratching the surface. And I just like couldn't imagine continuing to feel that like defeated and deflated for however long that runway, you know. And I mean, I was making a lot of that up in my mind, but I was trying to like map out what that would actually look like. And yeah, I think it came down to just enjoyment and you know, to your, you said like, well, you know, the training thing was hard, and I think that's the difference. It's like hard for what, right? Like I think they're always, and I really recognize this now, is like there's a difference between hard and miserable, right? And I think
Mm-hmm.
in relation to school at that time, I was miserable. so it was like hard with no payoff, right? Hard with no purpose, with no undercurrent of excitement. And I think that's the real balance between like hard and miserable, right? Like hard in my mind, like how I define that is like it's okay if it's hard. It has this. You're still. It's engaging. It's something that you're excited about at some level. And miserable is just like there's no benefit. Um, so yeah, I think that was it for me. I think I was, for maybe lack of a better term, I was miserable, and I just wanted to enjoy it because I liked being a student too. Like I think that was part of it as well. Is it really took that like joy from me. Like I really enjoyed
Mm.
learning. I still do. Like I'm like a student every day. I like read and I love like exploring new concepts and different things um yeah, so I think it like took that from me too, which was frustrating and again like miserable versus hard. So yeah, I think I just didn't want to I didn't want to continue to like push forward with no clear benefit. And I
Huh.
think that was the difference.
Is that something you've ever faced in the physical, like endurance sport space? We don't necessarily have to dig into it too much right now, but I'm curious if that's always stayed in the, well, this is hard, but I'm seeing the benefit for it. Like I can anticipate or see that there's a payoff. Or have you ever come to a point in the physical space where it was like you're trying to accomplish a goal or training in some way and it was feeling more miserable?
Yeah, a lot. And I think that's a really core kind of tenet as we think about like our athletic identity and people who engage in that space in whatever way. Like it doesn't have to be like endurance, it literally could, however people move. Um, I think we all get to, different kind of junctions where we have to decide if that's the thing that's like still fulfilling, and so for me, I'll give you an example. Like the last 100-mile ultra marathon race that I was scheduled to run, um, I had been struggling with injury in my left knee and my hip for a while, and it was actually from before that the last 100-mile race that I'd run. Um, and I signed up because again, it was just like part of like who I am. That I thought that at the time.
Hmm.
Um, and I kept going and I kept training and I was like, and I just kept being hurt. Like I couldn't work through it. It was PT and massage and mobility. I was doing all the things that I like knew how to do and leveraging all the resources that I have. And it like every run hurt after every run hurt. And I got to a point where I was just like, well, this is diminishing return. Like to what end, right? Like, is this really what I'm going to do? Is I'm just going to keep pushing. Like at this particular time, it was like February. The race was in September. And I was like, I mean, what is this it? Like for like the entire year, I'm just gonna struggle, and then what I'm gonna do this race, I'm clearly gonna be hurt to some level. Like even if I can show up and feel healthy, this race is absolutely going to hurt me again. And and so I pulled the plug, and I haven't run a 100 miler since. I haven't run. Let me think about that before I say it. I don't think I've run an ultra distance since then. I may have run like a 50K with friends, but that was probably that was 3 years ago. Um, and and it's just I had to like ask myself what the value of engaging like in that particular distance was, right? Like, is it the distance that matters, or is it feeling good and being healthy and like sharing experiences with people that I care about? Like, that's really what I was doing. Like, I have a really good friend of mine that I was training with, and I liked running in the mountains with him. Like I liked getting up early and seeing sunrises and in the mountains and it was really just a means to an end. Like it was like a way to have these experiences with people that I enjoy spending time with. Um, and if it wasn't really giving me that, like, what's the point? Like I don't need to do 100 miler just to say I've done it. I had to get to that point. There was a time before I kind of had that talk with myself where I wasn't clear what the answer to that was. But yeah, I think, and I've had lots of like crossroads like that where I'm like, is this thing, is it worth it? Like, what's the value here? Why am I doing it in the first place? Like, what's my why? Um, I always advocate for a why that is deeper than just like to see if it's possible, right? Or to see, like, again, like my why is like, because like those shared experiences are things that like otherwise I'm not able to engage in, right? Like to have a body that is fit enough to share experiences with friends of mine in the mountains, like if I don't have that fitness, I can't engage in those things. And that's something that's really important to me. It's not because like to see if I can do it, right? Or like because it's hard. Like I think it's always something deeper than that. So I think that why, like when you're clear on that, those crossroads become a little easier to navigate. I could go on and on, like literally, it's happened so many times where I'm just like, what is the point, or
Yeah. Well, let
what
me
am I
pick on
doing
that
here?
piece a little bit more, looking back at that transition out of college when you were thinking at first, moved to double history, religion major, really enjoyed it, did really well, were thinking you're going to keep down that academic path. Was that, whether or not you thought about it in exactly these terms at the time, was that digging into your why and um, any part of why you moved from the path of I'm going to pursue like being in academia with this to no, I'm going to go work? Were there other pressures? Like, what kind of do you remember about that? Because a history religion major, like that is, there's no clear work career path
Right.
coming out
Yeah.
of an undergrad
You,
degree with those. It would usually be a more schooling or like, okay, I just got my degree and I'm going to go do stuff. Um, so did that kind of processing thinking play into why you ended up not continuing to pursue academia? Or was it not even that deep in that, not
yeah.
every surprising thing we do in our life has to be super deep, but
Yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, I think it probably was the under tone here. The context is that in college, I was lucky enough to meet my now wife, and we were dating, and I was certainly factoring in what our lives could look like, right? And
Mhm.
what we wanted that to look like, and and so I think yeah, that was part of it, and there was no pressure from her. um but yeah, I think like part of it was I was ready to get to work, right? Like I was ready to like build a life that allowed us to do things, and part of that was like, what did that look like from a debt perspective? Like, did I really want to go to school for another 10 years? And like, you know there was some scholarships available. I mean, but there was going to be a massive financial commitment in any number of facets. Um, if nothing else, like the program that I was looking at was in New Zealand. Like my wife had a really good job. She is so much smarter than I am. And she graduated college early, like got a job with a big financial institution. Like she was well on her way in that particular season of her life. And she was going to have to quit that, right? Like I was like, well, now we're going to go to this other thing, and you're going to like work on a sheep farm, or like literally we were looking at, I was like, what can you do? And that was one of the options. Like you know she worked in the US stock market. That obviously wasn't going to carry over into New Zealand. So yeah, I mean, definitely it was. And to your question, like that was my why. I was just like, it has to be. Um, that mattered more to me than like a degree. Um, and I didn't. And when I was honest, like I didn't want it bad enough to fight for it. I think that's the other.
Mhm.
And I think there's a lot of. I've had a lot of instances like that in my life where I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I don't, there's things worth fighting for. Absolutely. And then there's also things where like, if it's too hard, like, is that a sign? Like I remember like
Yeah.
another real
Mhm.
conversation we had is like we had a our dog and and I was like, what are we gonna do with him? Like we had rescued him from a shelter. He had like severe separation anxiety. I was like, he would die if we put him on a plane. Like he would literally be so nervous. There'd be no way that he would make it. And that was a consideration. Like, I mean, we had that dog up until just like a few years ago. He lived to be very old.
Mhm.
He was a black lab. Um, and like he was great. And I was like, well, this is like I'm responsible for him. Like I can't just make a decision um, that that like puts this dog at risk. Um, and yeah, so I mean, there was a few things at play, and I think ultimately, it was just like this doesn't feel like where I'm supposed to go. I was excited to build a life, um, and like kind of get started on that. And I mean, yeah, it sounds like silly, but I had this dog that I really liked hanging out with, and I was
No,
like,
that's
I
good.
don't want him to like suffer. Like I'm not gonna leave him. And we went on to have like what like from that point like 16 more like awesome years together. Um, and yeah, I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, other priorities. Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So you said soon after you graduated, you were excited at that point, like these other things are more important to me than pursuing the academic route. You said soon after that you started a company. Did you do that while you're working at another job? And what was the company and what led you to that, hey, I want to start something
Yeah.
uh, pursuit?
Um,
Because there's nothing inherent about um, doing endurance athletics or enjoying history, religion, that kind of stuff that says entrepreneur. Like what
right.
brought that thread into your life?
Yeah. I've thought about that a lot. I really want to have a very clear answer for that. I don't know. I mean, part of it, I'm sure part of it is when I was, I don't know, I was probably in middle school. Um, my dad quit a very stable job to start his own company, which is great, which I have a ton of respect for, and has gone on to continue to be an entrepreneur for the rest of his life. Um, and and so I mean that had some impact for sure. Just this idea, like you can do it. Like my, he didn't have any like experience in starting a business. Like he took much like I was kind of on the trajectory of like took a started out with a very traditional path. He got a job working for the same company that my granddad worked for. It's a state-run power company. That was a clear path to retirement, right? Like just show up, do the work, 30 years, done. That's what my granddad did. My, and yeah, so my dad started down that path, and then he was like, this isn't it. So he started his own thing. And so I think I had at least some language to kind of describe, how that might look and feel for me. And so, yeah, to your question, I gotta say when I graduated college, yeah, I started. I had had a few jobs. Um, I got a job with a commercial construction company. My dad, I grew up like working construction jobs, and I was like, oh, okay, like well, I'll do that. I had no real. I got my like general contractor's license. It was kind of a cool job. I worked on commercial construction sites and did project management for this construction company. Um, and but I mean, I wasn't like that wasn't my gig. I was like, this can't. I just was like doing that
No,
while
there's
I
some of like, all right, I'm doing a job now. It's not as fun as this learning stuff, and it's also not as fun as my athletic pursuits.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, so I had started. That's an important piece. I had really started to ramp up the training side of things. So this was like post college, still running marathons, really trying to do that quickly. Um, Also had like run into some folks who were doing triathlons. I didn't know what a triathlon was. I got a bike, did some triathlons, did really good at those. I grew up on the coast, so I was a pretty good swimmer. I was a I was a fast runner at the time, and then the bike I kind of picked that up. Yeah, so this is definitely in the heart of like this kind of core like evolution of myself as an athlete. Which ultimately led to me realizing that I am a better cyclist than runner, and I started racing bikes professionally. Um, but there's a few years in the mix here where I'm like, okay, construction, that's going on. And I was like, this isn't really fulfilling. We also have to put this in context. Like, this is mid 2000s. So we're talking like 2008 downturn economy.
oh yeah,
Construction industry is not going that well. I remember talking to my wife. I was like, I feel like I got to like be proactive here, or like we're going to get blindsided. Um, and so, um, so I was like, what if I did something that I was really interested in? Like, what if I like, and at the time, and obviously up until even currently, like um, I was like endurance sports. I was like, can I get a job like in this industry somehow? Like, what does that even look like? And so I started poking around. Fast forward, I got a job with the Trek Bicycle Company, and um, that was cool. I was like, okay, now I'm in it. Like, okay, and I was like learning about all these things, and I was in the industry, and that that put me on a path like more exposure from a race perspective. So I started racing with one of their teams. I was traveling all around. I was racing bikes, and it was in that mix too that I started to just be exposed to different people and different ideas, and it ultimately led me to this is all over the span of like few years, um, to my first business. And that was this idea that, so at the time I was traveling all over, and I was training a lot. And every time I would travel, I would be like, where do I train? Like, again, this is you know, we, just for context, like it's pre Strava, it's pre Google, like Google Places, it's pre, like now, of course, like your phone knows where you're at, it pops up, like, this is all very easy stuff. This is, this is 17 years ago. Um, and so I would get to a place and I'm like, where do I like train? Where can I go for a run? Where can I go for a bike ride? And there was a fair amount of work to get that information. I would call bike shop, or like Google was in existence, but it was like just a map kind of. So you'd have to like spread the map out and like look and see like, is there a parking lot there? Can I run to this like trail? Do I have to drive there? Do I have to, like, all these pieces were at play? And I was doing this all the time. Um, and so myself and my co-founder set out to solve this problem. And what we did was we crowdsourced information that allowed us to get places to recreate around the world. And so what we did is we targeted the top 75 business travel cities in the world. We launched ambassador programs in all of those cities to crowdsource information. So we had a consumer app that you would go around, you could take pictures, you could add amenities, you could tell us the distance. You could, is it paved? Is it all this stuff? And the idea then was that when you touch down, you could geolocate, and it would give you directions to this place. And so we built we set out to build this like solution to this very real problem that we were experiencing, which was like, how do I exercise? How do I recreate? How do I do it safely? Can I trust this place? Because again, it was a pain in the ass. Like there wasn't like a real clear way to get that information. Um, and yeah, and that was, and I did work. Um, that happened in concert with these other things. So I was like building that. So I would wake up. So I had like a normal job. So I'd wake up at 4, work on my startup from like 4 to 8, go to my job, get home from my job, work on that, like take a break for dinner, work on that till bed. And I did that for like 2 years until I moved to my startup full time. We secured funding for that business, moved that business to California, and then I did it full time. But yeah, that was my setup for a while.
Like, so I'm like, how did you exercise then in that time? I'm sure you worked it out though.
Yeah,
That sounds very.
that's the other piece. I didn't. I sold, so I didn't have time to exercise. So I sold my truck and I rode my bike everywhere. So I'd also ride. It was 26 miles to my office one way. So I did that every day. So I'd ride my bike to work. I would leave a little early sometimes, and I would pull. There was like some neighborhoods on the way, and I would go into those neighborhoods and I would do a workout. So I would do like interval training, and then I would keep going to work, and then I'd ride home. So most days, like 75, a lot of days were like 100-mile days. At that time, I was riding 500 to 600 miles a week on my bike. Had startup that I was managing, and then had a full-time job, and then I was racing bikes on the weekends. Um, so then Friday, I would usually pack my stuff up and I would go to a race, and I would race Saturday, come back Sunday, start all that over again, rinse and repeat for years.
Uh, so one thing I do hear in that in the startup idea that you put together and eventually moved to full time is that you were serving other athletes like yourself. This is a problem that you have when you go places. You want to know good quality places to go work out, good bike trail, that kind of thing. Is there at that point were you thinking at all, or were you doing any other coaching or serving of other athletes? Did you have coaches yourself during this time? Like, when did that piece start to come into play for you in the endurance sport realm?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I started, I started working with a coach, um, myself probably a year or so into kind of the the time period that I just outlined, where I was really really focused
Hmm.
on training. And it became clear that like I needed to maximize my time, and like with most athletes, when you start and you just infuse like intensity and more training, you get gross gains, right? Your body responds to like just an influx of doing more stuff. And so that works
Hmm.
for a while, where you're like, oh, I'm getting faster, I'm getting stronger. And then so that's like 10%. And then so then that might take you to like 98 or 99%. But then it's that last couple of percent that really requires some real tweaking. You're not going to get it by just doing more or going fast all the time. And so I got a coach. Um, this was early days of you know cloud-based technology for coaching. So this coach worked at a bike shop en route to my office. So I would just swing by the bike shop once a week, and he wrote my workouts on a sheet of paper, and I would just put them in my pocket and cruise on. And it was just like structured, interval, literally just what you might imagine was like a kid, passing notes at school. Like it was just like a sloppy And I paid him, and rightfully so. I mean, he was a great guy, but I mean, I paid him $25 or something, right? I mean, he didn't provide really any sort of, there was no relationship there. I just needed some workouts, and that's what I felt like, you know, that's what I had access to at the time. And yeah, so the fast forward, it was like training more, and I did become really interested in coaching. I had gone on to get a few more coaches that really provided a tremendous amount of value over and above just workouts. And had made a lot of friends and connections, like racing, and traveling, and so started to have some people like interested in me working with them. I had started to really pay very close attention to my own training, and this was also the time period where we started to see access to a lot more kind of data in endurance sports. So we had early
Mhm.
versions of power meters, and heart rate training had certainly been online, but we're starting to understand like what to do with that information. And we were getting like devices. So these are early days of like a Garmin watch, right? And the foot pod. And you had all these things that could start to link up. And it was a massive pain in the ass, but it was so cool. I thought it took like 30 minutes to get all this stuff linked up before your run. But, I remember you stick your foot out and try to get the satellite, and you get it close to your watch. Um, and so I was like really, really interested in that stuff for my own training, and then started to talk to some folks about how to apply that to their training as well. And so I did start to work with some athletes. This was just like on the side, basically. Like I didn't have like TEC didn't exist at this point.
I just have to point out that I think it's very ironic that what pushed you away from med school was the math sort of stuff, and then what's drawing you into the coaching space is this data, because
Right.
data
No,
is
you're totally
numbers. We're
right.
talking about numbers all the way around. So
You're totally right.
it's a
Yeah.
redemption of the whole numbers thing in a whole different way than what you expected,
Right.
maybe.
Yeah. And I think yeah, I mean, that's a good observation. And I think it felt like school, right? Again, like I love to study, and it felt like it gave me something to study. It gave me something to learn. Like, what do we do with this information? Where does it go? Right. These were also like early days of software platforms to aggregate this data, right? So we see all this like spiky heart rate, like what? So I don't know. I loved spending time with that, um, because yeah, it was like a new thing to learn, and
Oh, it
I think
makes
I've
sense
always
that
liked
too.
that.
Like all the way along, you talk about learning or working hard, doing something towards an end, not just for the sake of the thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes sense to me that when there's these devices that have data, that you would also be thinking not just, oh, that's interesting, but like towards what end? What is this
Mm-hmm.
going to do? And be trying to figure that out. That sounds a lot like the history of your story also. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I want to pick a little bit on pivot back to you made the move a couple years into your first startup out to California, raised some funds, started doing that full time. It sounds like what you were doing with that was sitting at a computer a lot. Like, how did that how did that go? Was there ever a point in that startup journey that you were like, I'm sick of this endurance sports space because I'm in it all the time, but also I don't know, or was it all just roses, perfect happy story? Like, how did that interweave with your own participation in the sport and just your own like professional goals and vision?
Yeah. Um, it's a great question. I mean, that was a really dynamic time period. I This is a whole nother conversation, but I certainly struggled to rein in that work ethic, you know, touched on that a little bit, like this schedule that I kept, and that really only got more extreme as I worked. Once the startup was off and running, we had a team. We had right, like the responsibilities grew. There was money at stake.
So
Um,
getting to focus full time on it did not let up on the let's get started at 4 a.m., work out along the way, and work all day,
no,
all the time.
no, it got more extreme for sure.
I'm
Yeah,
exhausted thinking about that. Like, how did that go for you?
yeah. I mean, just yeah, like relentless. And that was, I mean, that was by my own making. Like I thought that's what was required. I did continue to train. Not so at this point, I had stopped like racing bikes in that capacity. I'd really stopped racing completely. And that was just the travel component. Like now I was traveling a lot for work. Um, and but I mean I exercised every day. And that really, I mean, that was still a really important piece of, I just knew, and I didn't put this final point on at the time, but I knew just like inherently that if that went away, like the wheels were going to fall off. The
Hmm.
wheels are pretty close to falling off, like personally anyway. And I was like, if my health declines, and like I want to be clear, like I actually wasn't healthy, like extremely sleep. I ended up like when I exited that company, like I had high blood pressure. I had like I was not healthy.
Hmm.
Um, I looked healthy. Like I looked, I was a runner, I was a cyclist, like I was skinny. I looked more or less like I do now. Um, but like not at all on the inside. But I just knew, even I was like, if this goes away, like this is gonna be bad news. Like the shit's gonna hit the fan. Um, and so yeah, I and that was the only thing that I would take a break from work for. Um, like I would exercise and I would not bring my phone. Because now we're in the era of like we all have iPhones. It's pretty much the workflow that we could have now, right? Like I have
Hmm.
email on my phone, so now it's just like constant, right? And I have all the notifications set up because I can't imagine like not responding immediately. So it's like my phone's is always like going crazy. Um, and yeah, exercise is like this can't be the thing that goes away. And yeah, it stayed consistent. I was also coaching athletes still. So there was a really interesting, like I was very intent on staying connected to that space. And I was involved in it like tangentially with the startup. We were doing, a bit of a different thing. We weren't like specifically kind of in endurance sports. We were, kind of above it in terms of trying to provide a resource for those customers. Um, but yeah, I was coaching athletes because I just felt like I wanted to stay connected to that space. It was something that I still really believed in. Um, so yeah, I think that was an important piece. I didn't recognize it at the time, but honestly, like it probably saved me from like, you know, maybe even being more unhealthy, having that like connection to people, being invested in those athletes, like emotionally, working with them, like doing everything that coaches do. That was a really great like I mean, it was almost like an escape, right? Like I really looked forward to that work.
Hmm.
And I liked the work of a startup, but again, like a lot of that was on me. I just didn't approach it. I was young. I didn't know how to like manage that pressure well with my personality. It just manifested itself in very poorly at times. So yeah, the coaching piece was really important.
So how did that go with your exit out of that company? Was that like you exited because you were ready to do something else, or the company got bought? Like, what was the exit? Was it like a big picture everybody thing, or like a Taylor's making a change? combination?
Yeah. Yeah, it was a bit of both. We were working to we thought that it was like a consumer app. Like, we were imagining that eventually we would get to a place where, like, you know, 5 million people would have this app on their phone, and they would be using it, and they would be engaging with this crowdsourced data. Um, as you well know, that's really hard to scale. It's hard to get those numbers. And we had made some progress there, but what ended up happening was that it was a data play. What we didn't really realize as it was happening is that we were building a database that was very valuable. Again, before all this information existed, what we ended up having was a lot of really, really um, trustworthy data points of where these places are around the world. And so I was I was ready for a change. It was also clear that it probably wasn't going to be a consumer app. Not at the scale that we wanted, and not to um, we weren't going to like accomplish the revenue stream component that we were looking for from that, like, a
Mhm.
freemium type model where 299 for an upgrade, right? We needed 20 million people to be, using the app or whatever. Um, for then, like, a percentage of those to upgrade to then have any sort of revenue. And even then it was not great, right? Like, it sounds ludicrous, but I mean, this space, like, the numbers are so inflated. Like, you start, like, you take on capital and you're like, okay, well, great. I have like 5 million people that are paying, but if that only gives me $10 million a year, that's still not really that great. Like, that still doesn't lead to that like 10x exit that, venture capital wants and these types of things. So
Yeah.
we were struggling to like figure out the model. And then it became clear that this data was important. So long story short, like, we kind of exited from the data. The data was acquired, and like the database, and that ended up being leveraged and used in another product. Um, and and then, yeah, at that same time, I was like, um, I think I was just burnt out. Like, it wasn't. I'd been doing it for a good number of years, burning the candle at both ends. Had kind of upended my family, moved them to California for this business, um, and and so, yeah, it was time for a change for me as well. So the timing of that, like, coincided for sure.
So I want to pick on that piece a little bit. You're coaching other athletes. Sounds like you got a lot of enjoyment out of that. That was maybe filling your bucket a bit. You're still working out quite a bit. You have this company. What was it that let you know it's time for a change from your job versus? I mean, I know you said you just sort of knew in your heart you needed to keep working out or it just wasn't going to be good. Um, but kind of outside of that piece, what was it that really let you know it's time for a change from the job? Like, was it from the job, from how you were interacting with it? What what were you thinking needed to change?
Hmm.
And how did you know that there was some kind of change needed?
Yeah, this part of the story is not particularly sexy, but it is very real in the sense that I went to get a physical at the doctor, and again, like, exercised every day, like, looked healthy, um, felt like, I didn't feel healthy. Like, I felt fit, right? Like, I could run fast, like I could ride my bike quick. Um, I certainly didn't feel healthy. Like, I mean, I was massively sleep deprived over the course of like years and years and years, chronically dehydrated. The list goes on. So I went to get a physical. Doctor checks me up. I'm like super confident. I've always had great physicals, I mean, up to that point, and then later in life. And she's like, you have like dangerously high blood pressure. She's like, I actually not sure I can let you leave the office without putting you on blood pressure medication. And I was 27 years old, and
That'll get
I
your
was like,
attention.
yeah, I was like, that's impossible. Like, I mean, literally, I remember being like, I mean, this sounds awful, but I was like, look at me, like I had a six pack. Like, I was like, what are you talking about? And she was like, she's like, I'm telling you. And I was like, okay, well, let's hold on a second on the medicine. Like, I don't remember exactly how that conversation went down, but and she said, I'll give you, I'll give you a week to like manage it. And if it's not like, if there's not some improvement, like it's dangerous. Like, I'm going to have to put you on medication. Um, and so I went home and I told my wife, and I freaked out, where I was just like, I ate steamed vegetables and like plain rice every day, like drank water, stopped drinking coffee. Um, and again, it was just that, like, it did come back to my why. I was just like, what the fuck is the point? Like, if, I mean, all this was to, so that myself and like, so I could, build a life with people that I care about, like share experiences with people that I care about. Like, if like, it's literally killing me.
Were you thinking at that point though, you're like, I went home, I quit drinking coffee, steamed vegetables. Were you approaching it initially as like, I I must need to change my diet, or were you thinking it all like this is coming from
Yeah. No, I knew it
your
was work. No, I was eating fine. Like, that was my kind of freak out
but
extreme reaction.
you were eating, but you knew that wasn't really your problem anymore.
Totally. That felt like a way to like control it in the moment. Um no, like, my diet was good, Again, like, I drank too much coffee, but um my wife's a great cook. Like, we have always enjoyed spending time in the kitchen. Like, I knew that that wasn't the thing. It wasn't like I was eating fast food, and like, no, it was my job. Like, I knew, and like, when she said it, I was like, I mean, I remember being like, yeah, like, I kind of figured that would catch up to me eventually. But I
Mm.
also just always thought that I was like young enough to beat it. I was like, yeah, but like, I can do that now. Like, I'm young, and I'll just fix it later. And I can work myself to death now, and like, it'll pay off. And then when I'm somewhere down the road, like, I thought I had, I don't know, I just thought I had like time in terms of like to right the ship. And I mean, it was in that same day where I was like, well, this this job isn't, it's not serving me anymore. Um and like, to some
I
end,
want to
like,
pick
it
at
was
that
killing me.
spot.
Uh,
So you knew you got this bad physical, you knew this is my job. It's way too stressful. So obviously the way things were happening, like it was creating this high stress in you, in your body, either at the time or looking back now. Did you see that also spilling out into what your workouts looked like, how they felt, and how you were showing up with other people in your job as a boss? Um, like, was it really just the physicality of this bad physical for you, where it was all being piled up on, or could you see it having an effect in these other areas also, either now or at the time? Like, how did it play out
mhm.
across the spectrum of your life?
Yeah. Well, it certainly was impacted my relationship with my wife, in the sense that I had an inability to be present.
Mm.
I didn't I didn't take a single day off work for 8 years. Um, we went on vacations. I sat in the room and worked. We went to dinner. I was working. We went, like, it was at all costs. Um, and again, I guess that was that, like, I thought I had like the luxury of time. I was like, well, we'll sacrifice now, and then like I can be present later. Like we can take vacations where I can pay attention later or whatever. Um, so I mean, that was and I'm sure it showed up in how I worked with my team. I'm sure it showed up in how I felt physically. I had just blocked a lot of that out. I just had this tunnel vision, singular focus on just a sprint to the finish line. Um,
Okay.
and with startups, like with tech startups, like that's how you think about it. Like it's not a legacy company. That was a company to be acquired. Um, and we were just like, all we have to do is just get it there. Um, and and yeah, that's all I thought about was what can I do? How much work can I put in every single day to get it a little bit closer to the finish line? And then when I get to the finish line, I can take a breath. I can take care of myself. I can pay attention to my wife. I can be engaged in conversations with
Mhm.
people around me. The list goes on.
That's interesting. So I want to kind of push forward because we're already at like an hour here and want to get to a little bit more piece of the story. But I think it's just interesting to note that, which makes sense. There's so much this tunnel vision from the culture you were in that um, you really had to have some actual data put in your face to make you really stop and acknowledge that it wasn't working for you. But even still, that it beyond maybe the very close areas to you, it it doesn't even stick out now like how that was affecting all of these other areas of your life, even though
Mm-hmm.
logically we know it must have shown up somehow. But
Mm-hmm.
just what that tunnel vision creates. And says a lot about how much you value your wife, that was the other area that you immediately went to, understanding that you were making those trade-offs. But um,
Yeah, totally.
post leaving your startup, you move on to other things. When was it you found value? It sounds like during your time as an athlete, you really found value over time working with good coaches. You must have been providing value as a coach to the athletes you were working with, for there to be more athletes that wanted to work with you and for people to work with you over time. When was it that, like, what brought you to the point where you decided you needed or took advantage of some more like work professional leadership development type of coaching? I don't know what you would have called it at the time, but why did you bring that piece into your life? Like clearly
Mm.
you're already very disciplined and able to keep yourself on track, more or less.
Mm-hmm.
So what was the impetus for bringing this other piece into your life?
Yeah. Um, I think I got really tired of doing it alone. If we back up just a second, like just so that company, we get out of that company, acquired, move on. The next thing I did was start a coaching company, like a little bit loosely. Like I took a bit of time because I was like, you know, I gotta like right the ship again. So I don't want to paint the picture that I like dove fully straight back. Um, but I had some athletes I was working with. I was like, okay, like this, I really like this. This is something I can do. I'm interested to think about this through the lens of like what I learned from the startup, which, is like challenging as that was. I've always described as like, that was business school, right? Like I learned a lot. I mean, it was brutal, but so was business school. Maybe, I don't know. I've never been, but that was like my real world business school. I learned a lot. I'm grateful for that
Yeah.
experience. I was like, okay, how can I apply some of these things to this new business? So started that, moved forward, and yeah, and did that alone. partly out of like fear, I think, from like getting myself back into the same situation I had been in before.
Hmm.
My natural like resting place is not rest. Like I that's my default mode is what I just described. Like I wasn't pushed into that position. I wasn't. No one told me to work like that. That's just where I land naturally. And so as I moved into coaching, that TEC was born. Start building that up. Yeah, I just really wanted, I think part of it was like being a student and wanting to like hone those skills, wanting to engage in business in a way that felt like fulfilling. Um,
Yeah, let me
Part
ask,
of it, yeah.
tell me if
But
this makes sense. Because you mentioned when you started even getting those workouts from your first endurance coach to working with other ones, that is like you could buckle down and just work really hard and get faster and go farther on your own to a point. Like your bodies know what to do, you can gain this certain amount of gain. But then there comes a point that just trying to run faster or just going longer, you get diminishing returns, doesn't help as much. So you needed an expert to kind of help you do that tweaking for that final percentage. Was
mhm.
it somewhere along those lines where, like, obviously you knew how to work really hard, you built up a company, you led a business, you knew how to push and like work all the time, but finding a way to like tweak how you were doing well without just trying to do like push more, that doesn't come naturally to you. You couldn't really do that so well on your own.
Mhm.
Does that analogy I'm drawing across make sense? Was it something along those lines that like you didn't quite know how to do that yourself and needed help to approach it differently?
Yeah. I think that's a great analogy. I hadn't thought about it that way, but I think that's exactly it. It's like I had made those gross gains and gotten the, whatever, the 80% on my own. And yeah, I think it's exactly it. I was like, can I figure this out? Like, probably, maybe. I was like, but it feels like if I can flatten the learning curve, and I had come, I, you know, I know the value of coaching. I know the value of
Hmm.
mentorship. I've been in that space in, you know, multiple capacities most of my life. Um, and I just, yeah, when I thought about how to solve for that to take me where I wanted to go, it seemed like the very clear answer was like coaching or mentorship or some group of people, something to like help me build that bridge. Like that it didn't make sense for me to try to figure that out all on my own. Um,
Let me pick
and
on that
that,
just a little bit because
mhm.
for a long time you'd had some kind of athletic coach, you've been doing athletic coaching, so you understood the value there. Why do you think it took you so long, like post it sounds like post your exit from the startup company? So that's why I'm saying so long. Why do you think it took you so long to think I need this in other areas of my life, or I need this in this area of my life?
Yeah, no, I mean it did take a long time. Relative to what I could have accomplished had I sought that out sooner, and the answer is pride. I thought I was really good at business. I was like, I've been an entrepreneur most of my life. Like, I got this. Like, I don't need other people. Um, and yeah, it took me a while to kind of come to terms with that, and to be like, no, I don't have all the answers. And it's not my job to have all the answers too. Like, that's the
Hmm.
place. Like now, currently, I love showing up as not the smartest person in the room. I hope that that happens every time. Like if that's not the case, like I'm not surrounding myself with the right people. It took me a while to recognize my role in kind of the ecosystem that I have built.
Hmm.
Um, and that support is the way to move forward. Mentorship, like to put surround myself with people that can help me figure out solutions to the things that I want to solve. And it's not all my ideas. Like and so yeah, I think that was just me grappling with like some pride stuff to and recognizing I think like what leadership is, what entrepreneurship is. One of the real tipping points too was recognizing that I was really just a technician, right? Like I was a small business owner, not the entrepreneur that I had told myself that I was. Meaning that for me to get to where I wanted to go and to be able to actually build like legacy and impact focused businesses, I had to get out of my own way. I had to remove myself from day to day operations or just remove myself from the as a linchpin that's stopping the growth. Um, and again, there's just some pride stuff there. I was like, oh, yeah, like that's a narrative that I told myself. Like I have this business and we have these people and we have all these athletes and we have all these things. But like at the end of the day, like if I leave, the whole thing falls apart. Um, and um, and that's not what I'd set out to build. And so it took a recognition of like, oh, I need some support here. Like there needs to be somebody. I need somebody to help me understand like how to build this bridge. What are these next pieces that clearly I'm not able to put together on my own?
So just to pick a little bit deeper than that pride answer, like, what do you think it was, either within you or just within the differences of these spaces, that it was easier to see way earlier on, um, the value that having an endurance or athletic coach brought to you or would bring to you? What made that more natural, inherent, just kind of part of that journey that you had in competing in the sports and being involved in that space, um, versus it being so much harder to see that as a potential value or thing to pursue or put in your life earlier?
Yeah. Well, I think I've thought about
Some of the
parts of
pride,
this a lot.
okay, but you probably could have been prideful about sports too, because apparently you took pretty naturally to cross country running and this stuff, and
Yeah.
but you saw a point at which you wanted to get better than what you thought you were going to get completely on
I
your
mean, I
own or
think
had space to do.
I think part of there's some differences. I don't know if this answers your question, but one of the things I've thought about a lot is like with with sports, it's um parts of it are like pretty cut and dry in the sense that like we have science. We know that if I apply certain stimulus for long enough, I'm going to yield fitness. There's a lot of that's out of our control, but in terms of like really seeing that progression and understanding the building blocks of that and having that laid out in front of us, we can get really really clear on what that looks like. Like I can build I can build out a multi-year plan for an athlete and we can now there's going to be a lot of bumps in the road, but we can generally map out that progression towards their goals. That's really hard to do in business. It is much less clear.
Just if,
um,
like in sports, it was like if you're getting this time in your marathon, it's it's kind of very clear data that other people have a faster time in the
mhm.
marathon, and so it was more like, let me just get access to the people that know how that tweak happened to increase that speed. It's like a little bit more of a cut and dry
Yeah, I think
process
there's
rather
less
than you
in
have a time. It's more
yeah.
black and white.
Yeah, in
Is that-
some ways, and I'm not, like obviously I appreciate the nuance of endurance sports. But in many ways it is a lot more cut and dry. It's a lot more black and white. Did I do it or didn't I? Is the time faster or isn't it? And then what do I need to, right? And then we can rinse and repeat. Like it's not overly complex in so many ways. Building a business is all nuance. There is no right, like it's
Yeah,
so
yeah. You don't walk out of a meeting going, okay, I had this time, and the best business leaders walk out with this
yeah,
time. It's
right. And like when you're building
way
it,
bushier than that.
um yeah, there's so many moving parts, and it's so um yeah, I don't, it's just harder, and it's harder, I think, to recognize. In some ways it's harder to recognize our strengths.
Hmm.
In sport, you can, like, it becomes very clear, like I'm a great climber, right? Like on a bicycle, like I can go uphill. um I'm a good sprinter. You have data, right? I did this climb faster than everyone else. If I do that enough times, I'm probably a good climber. If I continue to beat people in a sprint, well, guess what? I'm a good sprinter. We should lean into that, right? Pick a zone. It's
Hmm.
in business. It's just not as clear, like where you're strong at, and in specifically with leadership, when it comes to, and when I'm talking about leadership, I'm talking about like, you know aggregating people and moving a collective group of individuals, like in the direction of a shared mission. So we're not talking about like, I'm going to put in, I'm going to market my business better. Like there's tactical pieces of business that are
Sure.
pretty clear cut and dry. But when we talk about like building, scalable companies and solving things that no one has solved for before, and thinking about things differently, like there's so many moving parts, and it's really hard to know like what you're good at. And it's
Hmm.
really easy to fall back on to things that that you're good at, to hide from pushing yourself to be better, right? Like I'm a details guy. So like if I'm hiding, um I just fall back on details, right? I'm like, oh, I can do like operations, right? I can just make a long list of all the things that need to be done in this business,
Get
and I
shit
can just plow
done.
through. Yeah, I can,
Cross it
like,
off the list.
website
Yeah.
and marketing and admin, and I can just map out all of the details, and that feels good. Um, and I'm hiding from like everything else, right? In terms of like what's actually required to for me to truly like show up in that space. And so back to like the mentorship piece, like that's the it takes like an external, you gotta have somebody else looking at that. You gotta have some outside perspective, because it's so easy to hide in the things that you're good at, and that's probably not what's going to move your business forward. um,
So it sounds like you got to a point post exit from the startup where you you made some changes. So like, okay, this should, in one way, it would be easy to tell yourself like this should fix all the problems that I had with the startup of the overworking. So I'm doing stuff different now, but you still got to a point where you realized you weren't maybe having as much fun as you wanted, or weren't as like, there was still maybe a high level of anxiety or worry, some version of that, and where you looked at it and recognized the end that you cared to build for was not what was there, and that it might be difficult to get there on your own. Some combination of those
yeah,
things. Is
I
that
think it's the latter.
accurate?
I think
It was
I
more or less that second piece.
yeah, I think I knew at least as much, with the information that I had. I knew what I wanted to build. and I knew that the actions I was taking weren't going to add up to that. And that I didn't know what um, I didn't really know what to do to pivot. I didn't know,
Mm.
how to solve for some of those things myself. Um, and again, that comes back to, or it certainly ties into a bit of that pride piece, like where it's that started with a very real conversation with myself of like this isn't really working for you. Like if you want to really do what you say you want to do, then you better make some changes. You better figure something out. This trajectory where you're just doing it all on your own, and you like, what's the end goal here? It's going to either take too long, or
Mm.
you're gonna fail in the process. And so I think that was part of it too. It was just like a real recognition. It was like, well, you tried it this way. This isn't working. Like if you're real honest with yourself, Taylor, this isn't. It hasn't added up to be what you've said you wanted it to be. So if that's still truly what you want, like what are the actions you're willing to take to to change that? Um, and yeah, and I was like, okay, well, then that must mean somebody else needs to be involved, right? I need to get some other people on the bus uh, to help me answer some of these things.
Yeah, when you're saying it like that, I'm like, that so clearly draws a line to the point at which you got an athletic coach of like the stuff you're
Right.
putting in aren't getting back out the level of tweaks that you want. Once you could recognize that, it's like, oh yeah, that's what other people are for. Um, but can be hard to bring in. So
Yeah.
I think we're getting close to when probably we should wrap up. Um, but I want to pull on that just a little bit. Like you recognize reality within yourself a little bit to the point where you were realizing what you're putting in isn't, you're not getting out what you really want of it. Um, so you got some coaching, some mentorship, some help, something. Was it like the first conversation, I'm sold, this is it? Now I have the new clear vision of tweak these inputs and I'm going to get what I want. Like, was it that clear and easy or not? What was that like kind of delving into that new world?
Yeah. No, hell no. No, it wasn't clear at all. Um,
Can see through your face, you're like, no. Mm-mm.
yeah. Well, and it's the same. It's the same with exercise. I mean, to draw that through line, right? Is it like you decide to do it, you start doing it, and then you just have to stick with it long enough to see results, right? Like that. I mean, that's why
Mm-hmm.
people get frustrated with exercise or don't remain consistent, because it takes a hell of a lot longer than we want to believe that it does, right? Like way, way, way
Mm-hmm.
longer. Like it's not 90 days to your best self, right? It's like 90 years, right? Like it's a lifetime pursuit. Um, and that's the same thing when in business. No, I sought out mentorship and different groups and really put myself out there. And then for, I mean, certainly months of like consistent weekly engagement. Um, I was like, where is this going? Like, how is this going to help me? I wasn't clear where these conversations I was having with people were supposed to end up. Um, but again, I was I'll credit like endurance sports and training. I also was well versed in that space in the sense it was like, well, I can sit here, like I can hang out in
Mm-hmm.
some sort of ambiguity, knowing that typically consistency is what yields results. If I just keep showing up, then I have to give this enough time to see like if it yields results. Like it doesn't make sense. I don't expect anything ever to happen in like a month, right? Or 6 months. Like things take time, like especially like hard things that you really care about. Like those things should take some effort to move. Um, And so I just had really, and I did this at the onset. I was like, I'm just going to stick with this. I'm going to give it, I'm going to engage in these conversations. I'm going to keep finding people to connect with. I'm going to keep investing in myself and working to have conversations that I've never had, to think about things that I've never thought about before. And that alone felt like it was worthwhile. I was like, there's probably like there's something here. Like if I haven't thought about these things before, I haven't talked about them, or people are asking me questions that I've never been asked before, like there's something to that. Like that's in some way that's what I'm looking for, even if that doesn't necessarily yield results. Like it prompts different ways of thinking, or it kind of reroutes your mental framework. And yeah, no, I just decided to stick with it, and I think, yeah, I don't know, that always seemed like a very obvious um approach. Like I was
Well, when you
never
talk
under the
about
delusion that I was gonna like show up for a first like mentorship call, or like a group entrepreneurial thing, and I was like, all right guys, like thanks. I'm off now. I'm going to go change my business and
I got
I mean, I
the
just,
learned all the stuff.
yeah, like I got shit
When
to
you
do.
talk
Bye,
about
guys.
the endurance sports stuff, that makes a lot of sense because I'm sure with all your coaching of athletes too, you're probably really used to saying things like, "Hey, you got to just stick with this, be consistent. You're not going to, shave off those few seconds just because for 2 weeks you tweak this part of how you're working out. It's going to take
Right.
longer than that." So
Hmm.
saying that kind of refrain, even if it was in a different area, I'm sure must have shaped you also to understand that like real rewards or gains come with a different level of like consistency over time. That's very not our American culture overall, I would say. Um, but
Yeah. Yeah,
even
that's
with
a
these
whole
health
nother
benefits,
thing.
there is a lot of instant gratification. Like that's why fast food does really well, even though we all might say like, "Why would I eat that? It's bad for you." Like
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
like
Cause it's
the
quick.
instant
It's
stuff.
easy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because like being uncomfortable for long periods of time and sitting in ambiguity is like a really hard thing to do, right? Even with food.
Hmm.
You're like,
Hmm.
yeah, like I could go to the grocery store and I could think about ingredients, I could come home and I could cook it and I can all that, like what's the clear end? Like eventually it's a lot. Whereas like I show up to a fast food, I know what I'm gonna get. I don't have to hang out in prep work for very long. I get immediate results. I'm off and running. And I really work to, and I again, this is with endurance sports and business. I think you got to get really comfortable and really good at being in that space, because anything worth having takes a long time to do, right?
Yeah.
Fitness, a healthy body, a fit mind, a fit business, a great team, these are all like massive thing. Again, like they should be hard because they also don't exist. um Not everyone has them, right? And so because they're not free, because they're not guaranteed, like there's work required. And I just never imagine a scenario where it's going to happen quickly or it's going to be easy. And that's and I just, yeah, I think I'm just fine hanging out in that space. And that was part of like the mentorship thing with business, where there is an expectation alignment where I I committed before it even started. I was like,
Mm.
I'm gonna go in, like it's happening, and I'm gonna take this as far as I can take it and get as much out of this as I can. And even if this isn't the be all end all, and this, like, you got to give it, 100%. And I think in the business space, in the leadership space, it's hard. Like you want to see movement. Like in the work that we do in Impact Initiative, people have very real problems they want to solve in their business, be it revenue or team, and we want to fix those things quickly because they're pain points, they're frustrating, they're keeping us from our goals. But it takes some time, and it doesn't say years, but like you have to commit, you have to get into it. And
No, there's so
recognizing
much
that typically, yeah, go ahead.
that makes so much sense when you say it like that. I keep thinking of, we have idioms and sayings because usually gives us some common sense, ancient human knowledge. Like Rome wasn't built in a day. Like you can apply
Right.
that to endurance sports, the business world, to being mentally healthy, whatever else you want across the board. It's going to that point you've just been saying that making one change once doesn't do anything. You have to know it over time. But I can see how being in that space for so long as an athlete, you really very literally know that truth in your body. Like you
Mm-hmm.
had to do these same things over time consistently, get feedback, keep working on it to get to the places that you wanted to. And I can see how understanding that eventually started to serve you well when you started applying it to other areas of, okay, I'm going to commit to it up front and I'm not going to expect some amazing big thing day one of trying something different.
Mm-hmm.
But it makes sense. It's very common sense. It's really hard to do. It's hard to sit in that ambiguity, which you kept saying. And um,
Totally.
I haven't really thought about in the sports world that needing to have that willingness to sit in ambiguity too much. Um, Other than I do like college basketball, and we'll hear some stories sometimes if someone gets to their college coach or their NBA coach and they tell them, hey, you're shooting free throws wrong. You got to change how you're shooting it altogether. Then you get a lot
Mm-hmm.
worse before they get better. And that's one of those, like, you got to sit in a lot of ambiguity
Mm-hmm.
spaces. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I have never done anything close to a marathon. So I think about that. I'm like, I don't know, if you could finish it, just keep going. How much ambiguity are you sitting in there? But I'm sure there's a lot of it when you're really watching,
Yeah.
tracking your time, and you're trying to bring that time down just by that little bit. And
Yeah. Well, and it's
there's a
just like
lot of ambiguity
knowing.
sitting in business too. Like, we're going to try these things, we're going to tweak it, I'm going to work on myself, I'm going to try to think about something differently.
Yeah.
It's not going to instantly change
Yeah. It's like
everything.
the tweaks that we make in business are just like workouts, right? In the sense that if I do a week of really good workouts and I'm prepping for a marathon, that doesn't mean that I'm ready to run a marathon, right? I'm actually not really any closer than I was last week. I am just a few small building blocks closer. The only thing that moves the needle, it would be 4 to 6 weeks of really good workouts, very consistently, combined with good sleep and good diet and good, emotional, mental stress response. And so it's the same thing with tweaks in business. Is like, okay, I'm going to change this marketing strategy. I'm going to bring in somebody on the team. Well, that doesn't solve anything right now, right? Like it takes many of those. It takes and you have to let that hang out. You have to test that. You have to and you have to be willing to fail. You have to be willing to say, well, that didn't work. That was a bad idea. And you have to take feedback and not let it mean anything about you, right? Same thing on the training side. You have to be like, if the coach asks you, like, did you really do everything that you could to make this consistent and to get in your workouts? And if you know that the answer is no, don't be mad that the coach asked you that, right? Don't be mad that you're getting pushback, right? You have to be willing to say, no, I didn't. No, I stayed up too late. I spent too much time on Netflix. I sit right. Like if what you really care about is training for that marathon, then you need to go to bed early. You need to wake up and get your run in so that you can, right? Whatever that scenario is. Same thing in business. If that's what you really care about, you have to be willing to say, like, no, I didn't do this and I can do better, and we're going to work on it, like, and we're going to keep at it, and we're going to sit in this for much longer than we all care to sit in it, because we believe in it, and that's eventually stacked sum total of the effort is going to be what moves the needle. It happens even slower in business, right? Like, we can actually see movement relatively quickly in exercise, not as quick as people like, but we look at things in like 6 to 8 week chunks, where if you commit for 2 months, you can see some meaningful change in how you feel and your speed and your that business is tough. Like, 2 months, we're talking like, it's like, I mean, I don't even know.
Could be a big
Yeah, it's
difference,
just,
maybe not. Yeah, it's
yeah, I mean,
okay.
maybe
So
like, but it's probably like, it's when you see, when you have these like great months where things start to click, what I've found is it's probably like the cumulative effort of the last like
mm,
year, right? Of decisions you've made, small tweaks over time, conversations you've had, seeds you planted, people that you've put around you. And that slowly but surely, eventually that month, like it pops, and you're like, oh man, what do we do? What we did is we were at it for the last year. And we had some good days. We also had some shit days and some shit months and some things that, it felt like it was never going to move. But again, the tide starts to turn, but it's because you have the momentum of lots of effort behind you. It's like you hear, it's like the overnight success that took 10 years, right? Everybody
yeah,
loves
yeah,
to talk in business about like, oh man, that person went off and did this $100 million thing. What you didn't see was almost always like the decade that person spent in their basement, just beating their head against the wall, sticking with it for long enough so that they could finally get the momentum needed to turn, to turn the lights on. Um, and I think there's beauty in that. I love that that's the way it is. I think it shouldn't be easy. Like I love that it is brutal. Um, it's worthwhile, right? Like it doesn't have a lot of value if it comes easy. Right? It's like fast food. There's a reason it's cheap. It doesn't have any value.
yeah.
It's too easy,
It's cheap
right?
and
Like,
fast because it's
yeah,
not good for
like,
your body. Yeah,
yeah, like great meals cost more because they have value. It's an experience. It provides something. It's an inflection point in your life. Um, Same thing with business. Like if it happens overnight, like, I mean, one, very rarely is that the case, but it should be hard. Fitness should be hard to build. Businesses should be hard to build. Amazing teams should be hard to build. That makes you care about them, right? It makes you invested in them in a meaningful way. And I think that's great. Like, I'm glad it doesn't come easy, because the work is what is enjoyable, right? Like, the process has to be the thing that you're excited about, because
yeah.
we
That
don't know what
that's
the
what
end
I
goal
tell
is
my
going to
kids.
be.
Find the hard work that's enjoyable, where you enjoy
Right.
seeing the result, but you enjoy the hard work. Those are the
Mm-hmm.
places you want to put your energy. Well,
Yeah.
okay. As we wrap up, if I was going to kind of tie up in a nice little pretty bow, even though life doesn't work like that, the story of Taylor's journey so far. Tell me how this sounds. That um, the hard work piece across the board, that's a natural thing. Always good at that and applying it. Sports, work, whatever it was, that hard work piece was there. When you learned, or as you learned over time, to apply some of those other lessons from the sports to the rest of your life, the value of like learning from those who have already done it, of how consistency over time and changes is where you see the benefit of results. Though those kind of connections, bringing them all the way through to the rest of your life, is what helped you move into a space of more balance and like holistic healthiness across physical and work balance and life balance. Not that I'm not trying to tie it up in a way of saying you've arrived, you've got it. I think we both agree that like life is a journey and a process in all areas, and you've got to be in that process. But that pulling across some of those things of just being willing to commit and the consistency over time, and that pushing harder doesn't always give you results. Getting wisdom from those who've gone before you can really help a lot. Just bringing those lessons all the way across helped move you into a different place that's been valuable for you. Would that be a fair sort of sum
Yeah.
up of what we've talked about and where we got to?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, nothing happens in a vacuum. That all of our experiences in life, I think, apply to kind of all of the other areas and all
Mm.
of the kind of seasons of our life. I think that, um, I've heard it described as a phrase that I love by two authors that I like, Brad Stulberg and Steve Magnus. I think Brad refers to it as heroic individualism, right? It's just
Mm.
this like this idea that it's somehow heroic to do it all on your own and not need
Mm.
support, and that's not the way to go about it. Like heroic individualism is not the answer. That the way that we reach our goals, the way that we do the things we want to do in life is through like bringing people along with us and truly showing up for those people in a meaningful way and letting them show up for you and to share those experiences with people and so yeah, like make sure it's hard and not miserable. I think like you said, how the lesson you teach your kids, like um I think hard is great. I think we should look for hard things. Um, I don't think it should be easy. I don't think we get a lot of value out of easy, but it shouldn't be miserable. It should be enjoyable. And I think there's no better place that applies than in business and entrepreneurship. Like what an opportunity, right? Like what an amazing journey. Um, it can be. It can also be it can
Yeah.
also be brutal. Um, and it can be brutal for all of those involved, including the founder or entrepreneur, the people that started the thing. And I don't want that to be the case for people. Like I believe in doing hard things. I believe in supporting people that want to create great businesses and build a legacy. And I don't want that to be miserable. I've been there and it sucks. It doesn't have to be that way. So that's my yeah. Fast forward all the way to today, and that's just how I want to, I want to take all of the combined pieces of my experience and help people. I've said, um, I think it came up sometime. I forget who said this, but like that my job, where I spend my time, is to help people spend less time doing or spend more time doing shit they care about. Like that's how I sum up the work that I do and like how I spend my days. It's like I just want you to spend more time doing stuff that you like, and not being miserable. So yeah, that's the bow. That's the bow that wraps up Taylor's life story thus far. Um, Stay tuned, twists and turns. I'm sure to come. We'll have to do a
Who knows
yearly.
what's coming next? You'll never guess.
You'll
No, I can
never
totally see
guess.
that all the way through. It's like you learn something, you find some value from it, you really love to share it with other people. Like, hey, let me let me make this better. Even from your first startup of like you would go to a place, you figure out where you want to go work out. I'm sure that was part of the idea for that came from, well, man, now I know these great trails to go. Would it be great if anyone else who came here would just know these are some great places instead of them
Mm-hmm.
having to figure it out on their own? And
Totally.
that goes all the way across into all of those other areas. Okay, cool. I learned this. I know this. Let me make it easier for other people to know and not have to go do all the grunt work to figure it out for themselves, which is
Yeah,
awesome.
totally. Yeah, I think that sums it up. It's like just flatten the learning curve. If people can just spend more time or get to spend more time doing what they love more quickly and with more support and feeling less alone and less siloed, like that's where I want to show up for people. Like that's how I want my work to impact people. Um, so yeah, I'll keep at it, and it's really hard, and that's an okay thing.
Hard is not bad. Hard is good. Yeah.
Totally.
Well, thanks for chatting, and I think we're done now. Thank,